There's a reason financial freedom feels so far away from most people. Not difficult, not challenging, impossible. And the strange part is, many people feel this way even while doing everything they were taught to do correctly. They work consistently. They earn income. They pay bills. They try to save. They try to stay responsible. And yet, despite all of that effort, they still feel stuck, still pressured, still dependent on the next paycheck, still one unexpected expense away from stress. And after enough years pass this way, something dangerous starts happening psychologically. People stop believing freedom is realistic. Not because they don't want it, but because they've never experienced enough momentum to believe it's possible. That's what makes this trap so powerful. It doesn't just drain money, it drains belief. Now here's the uncomfortable truth. Most people are not trapped because they're incapable. They're trapped because the system they're operating inside is consuming nearly all of their energy. Financial pressure creates mental pressure. Mental pressure reduces clarity. Reduced clarity creates reactive decision-making. And reactive decision-making keeps people trapped inside short-term survival cycles. That loop repeats endlessly. Now imagine someone waking up every day already mentally exhausted by money. Before the day even starts, pressure already exists. Bills, debt, responsibilities, obligations, unexpected expenses waiting around every corner. That pressure changes how people think. Because when survival becomes the priority, long-term strategy starts disappearing. People stop asking, "How do I build freedom?" and start asking, "How do I survive this month?" That shift changes everything. Because survival thinking is reactive by nature. It prioritizes immediate relief over long-term positioning. And while that may solve today's pressure temporarily, it often strengthens tomorrow's dependence. Now let's go deeper. There are 4 invisible barriers that make financial freedom feel impossible. The first is exhaustion. Most people are too mentally drained to think strategically after years of financial pressure. They work all day, handle responsibilities, recover at night, then repeat the cycle again tomorrow. That leaves very little energy for building something beyond survival. And building freedom requires energy, focus, intentionality. Without those things, people default to convenience. Now, the second barrier is normalization. People adapt to pressure over time. What once felt temporary begins feeling permanent. Stress becomes routine. Debt becomes normal. Living paycheck to paycheck becomes common. And once something feels normal long enough, people stop questioning whether it should exist at all. That's dangerous. Because normalized pressure creates passive acceptance. Now the third barrier is lack of leverage. Most people only have one financial mechanism, active income. If they stop working, progress stops immediately. That creates fragility. And fragility creates fear. Because every decision now carries survival consequences. People become afraid to take risks, afraid to change direction, afraid to step outside familiar systems, even when those systems are keeping them trapped. Now the fourth barrier is invisible comparison. This one is psychological. People constantly compare themselves to others who appear successful financially. Social media amplifies this constantly. Better vacations, better homes, better cars, better lifestyles. And comparison creates pressure to consume, to appear successful before actually becoming financially stable. That delays wealth building massively, because people begin prioritizing image over structure. Now, here's where things become important. Financial freedom is not one giant leap. That's the misconception. People imagine freedom as some dramatic overnight transformation. a huge business success, a lottery moment, a sudden escape. But in reality, freedom is usually constructed gradually, one intentional decision at a time, one reduced obligation at a time, one asset at a time, one system at a time. And because the progress feels small initially, most people underestimate it. But small repeated decisions create exponential outcomes over time. That's the power of compounding behavior. Now imagine two people over 15 years. One continues operating reactively. Every increase in income improves lifestyle. Every financial setback creates more debt. Every stressful moment leads to short-term relief decisions. The cycle repeats continuously. Now the second person begins making small structural changes. Nothing dramatic. They reduce unnecessary obligations. They build margins slowly. They prioritize ownership over appearance. They begin creating systems outside active income. At first, almost nobody notices the difference. But internally, something powerful is happening. Pressure is decreasing gradually. Flexibility is increasing gradually. Dependence is weakening gradually. And eventually, the gap becomes enormous. Because one person spent 15 years reinforcing dependence, while the other spent 15 years constructing freedom. Now, here's something most people never hear. Financial freedom is less about increasing luxury and more about decreasing fragility. That changes the entire conversation. Because fragile people are constantly vulnerable to disruption. One emergency changes everything. One income interruption creates panic. One unexpected expense destroys stability. But strong financial structures create resilience. Resilience creates calm. And calm improves decision-making. That's why wealthy people often appear psychologically different around money. Not because they never experience stress, but because their survival is not hanging by a thread constantly. Their systems support them. Their assets support them. Their structure supports them. Now let's talk about identity. This is where transformation actually begins. Most people unconsciously identify themselves as workers, not builders, as consumers, not owners, as participants, not architects, and identity shapes behavior automatically. People act consistently with how they see themselves. That's why mindset matters so much. Because once someone starts identifying differently, their decisions begin changing naturally. They stop optimizing for temporary validation and start optimizing for long-term control. Now, imagine someone realizing for the first time, my job is not my freedom plan. That realization changes priorities instantly. Income becomes a tool, not the destination. Lifestyle becomes secondary to structure. Consumption becomes intentional instead of emotional. And gradually, their entire financial direction changes. Now here's the final layer most people miss. Freedom feels impossible when someone only sees the distance remaining instead of the direction they're moving. That's psychologically devastating. Because building wealth is slow initially. Compounding is invisible early. Progress feels tiny. But invisible progress is still progress. And eventually, momentum appears. Then momentum compounds. Then structure strengthens. Then pressure decreases. Then optionality begins appearing. That's when people finally experience something many have never felt financially before. Breathing room. Not panic. Not constant survival. Breathing room. And breathing room changes everything psychologically. It allows people to think long-term, to act intentionally, to build strategically. That's why financial freedom is not primarily a money transformation. It's a structural transformation. a behavioral transformation, an identity transformation. And once someone changes structurally, the financial results eventually follow. Gradually, quietly, but powerfully. And if you're serious about building that kind of freedom step by step, about reducing pressure, increasing leverage, and escaping survival mode permanently, like comment, share, and subscribe to Smart Money Compounds, because this series is designed to help you think differently, build differently, and eventually live differently. And comment below, what do you think keeps people trapped the longest? Debt, exhaustion, lifestyle inflation, or lack of leverage?